Hey guys, what's up? Oh, sorry, the '90s called. They want my intro back. But this video is going to be about deployment methods on manual folding knives. Basically, thumb stud, thumb disc, or thumb hole, and all the variations. Let me take a sip of coffee. Sorry guys, should have done this before I started. Yeah, a little dramatic there. And so I'm going to talk about which ones are my favorites and some points, and I think I've gathered kind of perfect examples of all of these options. So let's start at the left. We're going to do pros and cons because in my mind there's not one where I'm like, this one's the best. They've all got ups and downs, various points. So here we got thumb disc. One of the ups is ease of manufacturing. Well, that's kind of not really what I mean to say, but you only have one disc, one item that needs to be attached, and it basically is ambidextrous. You can open it left or right. So it's the equivalent of dual thumb studs, which dual thumb studs is literally two thumb studs. So there is one thumb disc that you need to install, worry about, maintain, whereas if you want to have this ability to open on both sides, in the thumb disc or in the thumb stud, I'm going to get things mismatched, guys. I am. So bear with me. Hopefully you'll know what I'm talking about. Thumb stud, you've got one on each side. So the downside to that is if a company doesn't want to fork out the cash for two, you may only have one side. I prefer dual thumb studs, not because I'm ambidextrous, just, I don't know, I like to play with my knives and open it both ways. Ease of use, it's harder to flick, in my experience, a thumb disc. You have less traction when you're almost, when it's in the closed position, you're kind of pushing on it this way, and unless it's super buttery smooth, I cannot flick it open very well unless I put a ton of thumb stuff in it. So primarily I do slow manual openings with thumb discs. I can't flick it. So that's something to consider. It is a little bit more difficult there, and I would say you have less traction on the thumb disc, and it's mainly because of how you're hitting it this way. It's just not as sharp an angle as the thumb stud. No matter how you hit this, you're getting it the same. You're hitting a nice crisp edge, and you're not going to slide off. With the thumb disc, you're more likely to slide off, and I have noticed that. I've had more, I guess, misfires, you might say, with the thumb disc due to that reason. As far as gloves go, there's no extraordinary difference there. I mean, if you're wearing gloves, as long as they're not super thick, you can open it about the same as without gloves. Looks, by far my favorite is the thumb disc. I like the looks of the thumb disc, and it's used less often, so when you see a thumb disc knife, it's a little more unique. But I definitely give the looks category top notch on this. Openability, it takes a hit because you do kind of more slide off in the closed position like that. And as far as obtrusiveness, there's no obtrusiveness above thumb studs. And what I mean by that is it doesn't get in the way of anything. In fact, I would say it's slightly less obtrusive than a lot of thumb studs. But, this will all vary too. I mean, everything, you could have a giant thumb disc, giant thumb studs, little ones. I mean, there's things that are going to affect all this just based off the particular one. So I'm talking kind of in general terms. And one thing too I'll talk about that here in a minute. So I kind of did a 2-in-1. So here's the thumb disc. I just kind of grabbed these knives at random just because they were similar size in terms of length and stuff. So it would make sense. But this is far easier to flick open because you can just bite down in there. Just bite down in there, less likely to slip off. This one is a dual thumb stud version, which I like, but as I mentioned before, a lot of the times it's just a single thumb stud. That's something that the manufacturer has to say, are we going to put forth the effort to do two? Like the Sebenza, Chris Reeve Sebenza, he charges more for the dual thumb stud. You can get both options. It's one of those hard things. I think most people prefer the dual, but when you have to pay more for it, you're kind of like, well, I don't really need the dual. If I'm actually going to use my knife, I'll probably open it this way. But anyways, that's neither here nor there. So a lot of the same similar things as this. Little easier to open. You just get a little bit more bite on there. It's non-obtrusive. but it doesn't quite look as cool. And I'm not sure if that's like an intrinsic value of thumb studs not looking as cool, or if it's just because there's so many more thumb stud knives. It just, to me, it just doesn't look as cool. And sometimes if they're not executed correctly, they can just look downright funky. If they're too small and if they're placed too far down on the blade, there's just something weird about them just sticking out of the middle of the tang. One example of that, I don't have it here, is the Grayman Satu. I always thought those thumb studs just looked kind of out of place and not like they belonged on that knife. But it could just be because there's way more thumb studded knives than thumb disc knives. I prefer the look, and this is just me, I prefer the look of the thumb disc. Now, next on the list, and this is the big one, because, I mean, these are fairly similar in a lot of ways. This is the outlier. Guess my kid's show's over. This is the thumb hole, piloted by Spyderco, which is why I picked the Spyderco knife. Even though a lot of different companies will use the thumb hole or a variation thereof, this is the one I picked. Now, the benefit to the thumb hole is it's pretty ingenious in a couple of ways. One being you provide an excellent opening facility. By the way, I stole that term from We All Juggle Knives. He uses that a lot. Check out his channel. I'm sure you do. What was I just saying? Oh, because it provides an excellent way to open the knife without putting extra material in. Meaning, when you add a thumb studs, when you add a thumb disc, you're adding weight, you're adding something to the blade. Whereas here, you're actually taking it away. Now that is a point, and it's not, I mean, it's true and it's not a true, and I'll talk about that here in a minute. You are doing that, but technically you're that's assuming that you'd keep the exact same blade shape, but we'll talk about that in a minute. As far as opening ability, I would give this the top rated out of all of them. I mean, just, especially when you got a nice big hole that you can stick your finger in. Oh, wait. Sorry, that was dirty. Especially when the hole's big enough that you can really get a good purchase in there. You know, I mean, it's just, there's no slipping. There's nothing to slip off of, you know. If you're wearing really big gloves, you know, that'll hamper it. But it's still, you know, as long as they're not comically big, you're going to be able to open this knife. And it doesn't matter if it's wet or oily or dirty. It doesn't affect it. If these are oily or dirty, you're more likely to slip off that thumb stud or thumb disc. Never mind. My mind's going to bad places right now. But with this, I mean, it doesn't really matter because of the nature of it. So definitely a very cool idea. Unfortunately, from what I understand, Spyderco was not able to patent the hole. They said you can't patent the hole. Maybe I'm incorrect. Maybe they do have a patent on it, but I could have sworn I read that somewhere. But the big downside to the hole, and kind of like what I mentioned before, how it's like, oh yeah, you're removing material, you're making the blade lighter and making an excellent opening facility. That's only if you keep the same blade shape. The reality is, I mean, look how wide this is. I mean, you know, this knife is basically just the scale with a little poking out. You can see, and I picked the Manix because it's kind of an exaggerated version of that, but it definitely illustrates all the extra material you need in order to have a big enough hole to open the blade. So that'll make your blades quite a bit wider. Strider does kind of the oblong version, which helps reduce that, but it also reduces, you know, it's not as easy to open. You have less purchase when you open it that way. And even then, you know, they still have, Striders are still a little bit wider than, say, something like this Horseman here, which is very, very thin and streamlined. And if you carry knives, EDC knives, you'll notice the difference here. I mean, more or less, we've got the same length, same width, same depth, but the width on these knives are very, very different. And you're getting the same cutting ability. I mean, this has a little bit longer of a blade because there's no choil, but with far less space being taken up in your pocket. So that's the downside to the thumb hole, is you have to, you know, in order to have this giant hole to stick your thumb in, it has to have a fairly wide blade. Now, like the Paramilitary 2, they kind of have the same thing, but they kind of taper it down and stuff. But still, you still got this width right here. There's no way to get around it with the thumb hole. So yeah, guys, Quick